Hi folks, welcome to this week's live class. I'm joined by Deborah Ashby, who will be taking over shortly to give you a top 10 Excel formulas you need to know. Deb's an IT trainer specialising in Microsoft Office training and content creation. She's been an IT trainer for 9 years and has been supporting Microsoft products for 21. She's a Microsoft Office specialist and a Microsoft certified trainer. So without further ado, let me introduce Deb, who'll be guiding you through the live class from here on out.
Thank you very much, James, for that wonderful introduction. I always feel like I've got a lot to live up to after James's introduction. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning from wherever you are. As James mentioned, my name's Deborah Ashby. I am an IT trainer and Microsoft subject matter expert, and I'm going to be leading the webinar today on the top 10 Excel formulas. Now, there are a lot of you on this webinar today. We always have this when we run our Excel webinars. They're always extremely popular and we have lots and lots of people on the call, which is fabulous, but it also means that we tend to have a very wide range of abilities. So I'm sure there's some people on this webinar today who are maybe more advanced Excel users, and there's also probably some people on the call today who are maybe just getting into Excel formulas or have a very basic knowledge of Excel. So obviously it's quite hard to kind of make sure that we accommodate everybody on both ends of the spectrum, but I'm going to do my best. We're going to start, with some very basic things and then work up to slightly more advanced. I'm not going to assume that you know anything about formulas in particular. So what we're going to go through this session is 10 formulas which are going to be really useful, the most popular ones that you find in Excel. And somebody said to me today, how have you come up with this list of Excel formulas? Have you just sat there and thought to yourself, what is it that people use according to me? Kind of, a little bit. As I said, I have been training Excel for 21 years, so I do have quite a good idea of the kinds of formulas that are most important or most used by Excel users. But also I've done quite a little bit of research on the internet, read various different articles, blog posts from different people, and kind of established a fair few formulas which you're going to find extremely useful, or they're the ones which you'll probably come across most often in your work. So it's important that you understand what these formulas do, how to use them, and also how to construct formulas and the basic idea behind formulas if you're not so used to using them. So we're going to cover a little bit of both. We're going to talk about formula construction, what is a formula, that kind of thing, the order, how you can write a formula, and we're also going to integrate into that the top 10 most used formulas. And the way I like to do these sessions is it's all going to be live demonstrations. So we're going to have an exercise open on the screen which you can follow through, and you can actually see how these formulas work. And hopefully I'll explain it in a way that everybody can understand. I am going to move fairly quickly. We only have an hour, and as James can attest to, I do tend to run over time every single time we run these because I do love Excel and I get so excited and start talking about various different things in great amounts of detail, and we tend to run over. But I'm going to try and keep it to an hour, so I'm going to move through fairly rapidly. If I am going a little bit too quick for you, because I know a lot of you might be writing notes, just to let you know that we do record these webinars, so you can, we'll make those available to you after this webinar. So if you want to go back and review anything, then please feel free to do that. So don't worry so much if you find I'm going a little bit too quick. Now, with that said, I'm going to try not to ramble on too much at the beginning, and we're going to jump straight into our first exercise. So let's just minimize that down. All right, so let's just start out. As I said, I've got on the screen here just some workbooks that I've set up that we're going to be using throughout the session. So first thing I want to discuss is just basically what is a formula. Now, when you're discussing formulas in Excel, there's two pieces of terminology that you'll come across. There's the word formulas and then there's the word functions. And it's really important to kind of be able to differentiate what we mean by those two things. So a formula is an expression which we use to calculate the value of a cell. So that might be something as simple as 2 plus 2 or 4 plus 3, or the cell reference is in there, so B2 plus B3, so on and so forth. Sorry, James is just asking me if I can ask you, can you hear me okay? Can you just type into the chat window? Yes? Okay, don't worry. We just had a few people saying they couldn't hear, so we just wanted to make sure that everybody could. Perfect. Okay, so that's a formula, an expression which will calculate the value of a cell. A function is something slightly different. A function is a predefined formula that's available to you in Excel which will help you perform that calculation. And you'll find all your functions on the formulas ribbon in Excel. So if you see here, I'm clicked on the formulas ribbon, and in our function library group we have all of our functions which are sorted into different groups. So we have them sorted on depending on what they relate to. So financial, logical functions, text, date and time, recently used, so on and so forth. Okay, so functions are there to help you create your formulas. So that's the difference between the two, the different terminology. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear on that first of all. Now, as I said, we are going to start with the basics. If you're an advanced Excel user, I really apologize for this because you're probably sitting there thinking, oh my God, I know this already, but there may be some people on this call who are not that familiar with how a formula is constructed. We have a spreadsheet here, very, very simple spreadsheet, and I just want to use this to demonstrate the different ways that you construct a very, very simple formula. So you can see here in the January column, column B, we have retail sales and we have internet sales, and then we basically have profits, so that's those two added together. And if I click on cell B4, and if you look up in the formula bar, this is what we call the formula bar just running across the top here, that's showing me the calculation. So equals B2 plus B3. All formulas in Excel start with an equals sign. So if you're going to construct a formula in a cell, you would always start with an equals sign in there. That tells Excel that you want to type in a formula. And that's what we have there, and it's a very simple calculation. B2, so 120, plus B3 equals 220. We can do that in a slightly different way. So that is a formula. We could also do it in a slightly different way by using a function. Now, what do you think? I'm going to pose this question to the crowd, and if you could just type it into the chat window, and then James will let me know what your answers are. What do you think is the most popular function or common function that people use in Excel?
So, somebody can put it before you finish.
Absolutely, there we go. James said somebody even wrote it before I'd finished the question. Sum, okay? That is the one which you will use the most often, and that is the one that we're going to use right now. So again, I could do this in a slightly different way. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add cell C2 to C3, but I'm going to do it slightly differently. I'm going to type in equals, oops, but this time I'm going to type in the word sum. So sum is a function, so I can just type that in, or I could have selected it from my function library. So if I just backspace out of there, I have a little insert function button on the formulas ribbon here, and this is where you'll find all of your functions stored. And you can search for them. If you know the name of the function you're looking for, you can just type it in. So I could type in sum and click go, and it would find it for me. Or if you kind of know what you want to do but you don't know the name of the function, you can type in the description or sort of keywords essentially. So I might say add totals, something along those lines, and click go. And there, it's got some in that list as well. It's got a few others in there also. Okay, so you can type in a description if you want to also. Either way is fine. So I'm going to type in equals sum. And then I could do an open bracket and highlight all the cells that I want to add up. In this case, there's only 2 cells, but it might be that you have a long list of cells in there as well. And I could type my formula like that. So what is that doing? It's saying equals sum, so we want to add up, and then it's saying add up everything in brackets. So C2, and then we have the colon, which means 2. Okay, so C2 to C3. If I had a longer list of data, so maybe I had data all the way down to C10, that would say C2 colon C10. Okay, so that's a quicker way of doing it instead of typing in C2 plus C3 plus C4, so on and so forth, to put in like that. Okay, so then when I press enter, we get the correct result. So you can see there's 2 different ways of doing this. One is better for longer lists of numbers, which would be using your function. If you've just got something very short, then you can just do it like that as well. Okay, so very, very basic calculations. What we can then do is use something called the Autofill feature, which this is one of my favorite features. It takes the hard work out of filling in lots of totals. So instead of having to do that function or that formula across the rest of these cells, I can use the autofill and drag that formula across the rest of them. Okay, and you do that, your autofill handle is in the bottom of the cell. So if you see here, I've got my cell highlighted. In the bottom right hand corner there's a small little black square or green square, and as I hover my mouse over it, my mouse changes, or my cursor changes to that very tiny black cross, and I can just drag that formula across to complete the rest of those totals. I'm going to throw out another question to you. If I just backspace, which some of you may have already preempted as well, how else could I do that? Instead of dragging across, does anybody know another way that I could get it to fill across? Type it into the chat comment if you know.
So we're getting double click, Control R, copy and paste. They're the three that we're getting in there.
Perfect. So we've got three answers here. So Control R, yes, you can double click it across, or you can copy and paste as well. And all of those things will do exactly the same thing. They will copy those formulas across. Okay, so a few different ways that you can do that. So very, very simple, basic formulas. Lovely. All right, let's move across to the next tabs now that we've got that basic sum calculation down. Something else I want to explain to you before we start going into some of the most common formulas is also the principle of BODMAS, because this is really important when constructing formulas, particularly if you're writing your own formulas. You need to bear this in mind, because if you don't really understand this principle, then you can get some strange answers appearing for some of your formulas. And I'll show you what I mean in a moment. But this always takes me back to high school maths class. I remember many, many years ago sitting in maths class and having the teacher write up on the blackboard, because we had blackboards back then. I don't know if we have any really young people on the webinar today who probably don't remember blackboards, but I remember my teacher writing up on the blackboard BODMAS. And that basically stands for brackets over division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. And this is what we call the operator precedence. It's the order in which Excel will complete a calculation. And that's particularly important if you have lots of calculations kind of going on in one formula. Okay, now I'll give you an example by what I mean by that. So again, we just have some very, very basic data up here, and in a blank cell I'm just going to type in, let's see, equals. I'm going to say B2 multiplied by B3 plus B4. Okay. Now I haven't put any brackets or anything in this. So when I hit enter, the answer that I get is 105. However, the answer I was expecting to get was 150. Now why is that? It's because when we click back in here, I haven't told Excel what I want it to do first. So when it's doing this calculation, it's doing the multiplication first, and then it's doing the addition. If we refer back to our little table, we can see the multiplication becomes before the addition. So it's doing B2, so 10, multiplied by 10, so that gives us 100, plus 5, which is why we get the answer of 105. However, if we add brackets in there, it should give us the answer of 150. So if I type in equals, and we're going to do exactly the same thing again, so it's going to be B2 times, but then we're going to put in brackets B3 plus B4. So we're going to structure it like that. So now according to the BODMAS rule, what's it going to do first? It's going to do the calculation that's in the brackets first. So it's going to do B3 plus B4 first, and then it's going to do the multiplication. So B3 is 10 plus B4, which is 5, so that's 15, and then it's going to times it by B2, which is 10, which will give us the answer of 150. So that is why, just a little demo of why it's important to understand how brackets affect your formulas when you're constructing them. Okay, so always bear that little BODMAS rule in mind, because sometimes you can get strange answers if you haven't applied it correctly. Lovely. Okay, moving on to the next tab, let's get into some of those most popular formulas. Now, as I said, we're starting very basic, and as you rightly guessed, the most popular formula is sum. Very closely after that, you would have popular formulas would be things like working out the average, working out the minimum value, the maximum value, and also counting values in cells as well. Now, these popular formulas are all kind of grouped together in Excel. So Microsoft have obviously realized that these are the ones that people use the most often, and so they've put them into a useful little area all together so that they're easy for you to access. And there are two places that you can access them. So you can access them on the home ribbon up here. You'll see all the way over at the end in the editing group, you have this little auto sum button, and there's a little drop down arrow next to it, and in there, that is where you have these popular formulas. So you have sum, average, count, max, and min. You also have those on the formulas ribbon where you would expect to find them in the function library under the auto sum button just here. So it's the same thing. Okay. Now I'm going to just quickly demonstrate these. They're very simple to use and they all work in exactly the same way. So here in my list of numbers, I'm just going to work out the total for all of the numbers above, so all of the salary. So again, I'm just going to click my auto sum button, click sum, and you see it automatically puts in the function for me. So it takes out all of that hard work. What Excel will do is it will 99.9% of the time, it will select the correct cell range. That's what we call this area here. So it's found the nearest numbers, which are above, and it's selected all of those. Occasionally, it won't select the correct cell range that you want, and you can just quickly adjust that by dragging it to over the cell range that you do want, or dragging it in, so on and so forth, just to make the selection correct. And then you can press enter to give you your answer. The same thing works for average. So if I now want an average of all of the salaries, I can do the same thing. I can go up to my auto sum, select average, but you can see now what I was talking about. It's included the total in the cell above. I don't want it to include that total. I only want to find the average of the actual salaries. So again, I can adjust that by dragging my cell range selection in, or I can click directly into the formula and just manually edit the cell number just here and change that to E14 if I want to, and you can see that the selection has now changed, and press enter. Same thing works for min. So minimum value, if you're not familiar with this, it will find the lowest value in a list of numbers, which can sometimes be very useful. So again, we're working on the same principles. We're using our min function. And again, it's selected everything above. So this time I'm going to drag it in just to show you a slightly different way of doing it. And I am absolutely terrible when it comes to using the mouse to drag things in. As you can probably see, it takes me an eternity. There we go, to find the handle. And there we go. And we're going to do the same for max. And this will find the maximum value in a list of numbers. And as I said, because I am so awful at dragging things in, I'm just going to change it manually like so. And then finally we have count, which will count how many items you have in a particular list. Again, this can be really, really useful. So let's just quickly do count numbers. And I'm just going to adjust that again to pick up only the cells that I'm interested in. And there we go, 12. Okay, so that's just a very, very quick example of how to use those most popular functions and formulas to really quickly get the averages, the totals, minimum, maximum, and the count values. Does anybody know, and I'm going to throw this question out again, these totals here, or the total, average, min, max, and count, there's another way of being able to find this out very, very quickly. Does anybody know a quicker way than what we've used there of being able to see the total, average, minimum, maximum, and count of a group of numbers?
Status bar.
Yes.
Highlight over the cell or bottom right of the screen. That's what people say.
Yep, I think some of you have got it. Very good. The status bar. This is something which people don't tend to know about, but I'm glad that a couple of you do. There's a really handy little utility in the status bar. If you don't want to have to go through and type all these in, maybe you just want to, you have a list of numbers and you very quickly want to know the total, but you don't necessarily want to type in a formula or have it showing in the spreadsheet, you can turn on this little function in the status bar which will show you it when you highlight the numbers. So down here in the status bar, if you right-click your mouse, you get all of these little things come up just here, and everything that's ticked is essentially turned on in Excel. Okay, now you can see here in this little group which starts average, count, minimum, maximum. I have a few things turned on here. I'm going to turn on all of them. So average, count, minimum, maximum, and I already have some turned on. So now if I highlight my list of numbers, if you see now in the status bar, what do we have? We have all of that. So we have the average, we have the count, the numerical count, the minimum, the maximum, and the sum listed there. It just means that you don't have to type it into the page if you don't want to. It can be listed in the status bar. Okay, so that's a little thing which people don't tend to be all that familiar with. So hopefully you'll find that quite helpful. Wonderful. So that's some of the popular formulas that we've covered. And let's go across to AutoSum and Autofill. I think I've pretty much covered that on the first page. This was just literally to go through the AutoSum, the filling across. So I think we're just going to jump straight across onto the Absolute tab. And again, this is some parts of formulas or formula construction, which is really important that you understand the difference between absolute and relative referencing in Excel. Now, what we mean by that is this demonstration is going to be something called absolute referencing. And what we're going to do in this example is we've got some departments, we've got some hire dates, we've got some salaries, and all of these lucky people are getting a salary increase of 2.1%. Lucky them, I say. And we want to find out what their new salary is. So we're going to use a formula which is going to help us do this. And this is a good way of demonstrating to you the difference between absolute and relative. So let's do the formula and then we'll explain what's going on. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click in the increase area. And we're going to increase the salary by 2.1%. So I'm going to type in equals. And we're going to say the salary multiplied by 2.1%. And I'm going to press enter. So that gives me the amount that that salary is going to be increased by. So the new salary will essentially be this and that added together. So then in here we can just do a very basic sum calculation equals this cell plus this cell to get our final new salary. So let's go back to the increase here. So we did a very simple calculation. We did E3, which is the salary, multiplied by I2, because this is a percentage, so we're multiplying it to get the answer that we want. Now I could think to myself, right, I want to do that same formula for the rest of these salaries. So I'm just going to double click to copy that formula down. But what happens? I get little lines in here. Now why am I not getting the answer that I want? Because essentially it should copy that formula down. Well, let's have a look. Let's click in cell F4 and see what it's doing. So in F4, the calculation is doing E4, which is this cell here highlighted, times by, I3. Why is it doing I3? It's not timesing by the percentage, and that's because it's using by default relative referencing. When you copy down, Excel will move the cell numbers down by 1, because if you're doing relative referencing, that works. However, if you're always referring to the same cell each time, you need to make this cell what we call absolute. So Excel knows every single time, even though it's going to move this the E4 down by 1 as we go down, so it will be E5, E6, E7, this one needs to stay the same. And we do that by making it absolute. And we do that by putting $ in front of the row and column ID. Okay? Now, On your keyboard, you can do this very simply. I can't do it because when I've got a microphone plugged in on these webinars, every time I touch an F key on the keyboard, the sound goes all crazy. So unfortunately, I can't use my F key, but you would be able to just click in where it says I3, press the F4 key on your keyboard, and that will put dollar signs in the correct places and make that reference absolute. I'm going to have to manually type them in. So I'm just going to put a dollar sign before that column and row, like so. Oops, she says. Let me back out of there. Please hold, everybody. There we go, that's better. Okay, so now when I copy that down, it's going to copy down correctly because each cell, if we look at it, E5 is referring back to that same cell. Okay, so that's the difference between absolute and relative referencing. And you can then go in and you can work out your new salaries just by adding these two together. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to everybody between absolute and relative referencing. Again, if you're fairly familiar with formulas, this is probably very basic stuff for you. Okay, let's move on to taking a look at some text-based formulas which are very popular and things which people tend to use. Text-based formulas are just really good ways of pulling out pieces of text very quickly. So for example, there's a formula called len, which stands for length essentially, and we're just going to use it to pull out specific pieces of text from these cells. So you can see here, I'm clicked in cell H2 and I've got here, I'm going to find the length of ADC, so the department here, ADC. So what I would do, if I wanted to find out how many characters were in this, I could type in equals and then len, and then I'm going to open brackets and click the cell, close bracket, and it will tell me how many characters there are in that. And I could do the same thing for this as well. So equals len, open brackets, click the cell I want it to analyze essentially. Very, very simple little formula which can be quite useful for finding the length of characters. Okay, so that one is called len. There's another one called trim, which is really, really useful. Now, this is not only useful for text. Now, the example I'm going to show you is for text, but it's also very useful for data. So if you are somebody who does a lot of data analysis, where you're dealing with a lot of raw data, maybe you're someone who creates a lot of pivot tables and you receive a lot of data from external sources, this is a really good one to use on your data to make sure that it doesn't have any erroneous spaces in between. So for example, you don't have like double spaces in between first name and surname, you know, things like that. So trim will remove extra spaces, leading and trailing spaces, spaces and line breaks. So it tidies up your data and makes it all uniform. Because we've all been there. We've all been typing in lots of data. You accidentally press the space bar twice in between a word, and before you know it, that piece of data doesn't match the rest of your data, which can cause you problems, particularly if you're doing things like pivot tables, data analysis, things like that. So I always advise people when we run our pivot tables session, this is one of the things I will show them is how to use the trim formula to tidy up their data before they even get started on doing pivot tables and things like that. So a very basic way to show you is here we're going to use it on text. So you can see here I've got this in cell A3 where it says many spaces. I actually have a double space in there. There's not supposed to be a double space, there's just supposed to be one. So I could use the trim command to tidy that up for me. So I can type in equals trim, and again it's just a case of open bracket, and you'll see every time you start to type in a formula you will get this little help text pop up, so it will tell you what Excel is looking for. So you can see underneath it says trim, and now in bold it's highlighting text, so it's saying what text do you want me to trim. So I can then just select the cell and close the brackets. And you'll see now it's removed that space and just given me that one space in there. So it will remove erroneous spaces. I can do the same for this next example. Trim, open bracket, and there we have just one space in between. The last example is just kind of sending that up a notch by adding in not only with the trim command but also the clean formula. We're going to intersperse that. So what clean will do is trim and clean essentially together will remove the extra spaces, and clean will remove the line breaks as well. So it'll put it all on one line. Okay, so we can combine the two very simply. So we're going to type in equals trim. Whoops. It would help if I could spell today. Trim. We're going to do open brackets. Now before we select the cell we wanted to trim, we also wanted to clean. So we're going to add in the clean option. And then we're going to open the brackets and select what we want it to trim and clean. And we need to close the brackets twice. Okay, why do we need to close the brackets twice? Because every time you have an open bracket, there must be a closed bracket on a formula. Okay, I don't know if I typed that in or if it's just hidden. Yep, there we go. So now you can see that it's removed the spaces and it's also removed those line breaks. And if you just want to take a closer look at that formula at the top there, that's what that formula looks like. So we're combining clean within trim as well to remove the line breaks. So as I said, I would use that to tidy up any raw data that I get sent before I start to do anything else. It's a really, really useful little option and something which I would recommend you do have a little play around with and a look into. Lovely. Moving on to other text formulas which are quite popular for extracting pieces of text from long strings. A lot of these examples we're using are quite short, but hopefully you can see how they might be quite useful if you're dealing with quite a lot of data. We have the commands right and left. There's also a command called mid as well when it comes to dealing with text. So you can basically pull out from text strings whatever you want. So for example, I'm going to type in equals and I'm going to do right. I'm going to open the bracket. I'm going to select the cell like so, and then I'm going to say how many characters to the right I want to pull out of here. So maybe I just want the last word, even, so I'm going to do comma and then 4 for the number of characters. And I'm going to close the brackets, and then it pulls out just the last 4. If I'd have done the last, what have we got, 9, then it would have pulled out upon Avon. So you can kind of see how that works. So we could do the same on William Shakespeare. If I just want his last name, I can type in equals, right, open my brackets, select the cell, comma, and then the number of characters. So how many do we want there? 11, I believe, and close the bracket just to pull out that. Okay. If you don't specify anything, and I'm not really sure why you would do this, but for example, if you just typed in right and then open brackets and selected the cell and didn't specify anything, it just gives you the last character. I don't know why you would ever want to do that. But you can probably guess that if you can do right, you can also do left. So again, equals, I could type in left, and this time we're working the other way. So if I just wanted the area code, I could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to select the cell, comma, 5, and it will just pull out the area code. Okay. You can also do mid, where you can select characters to and from. So you can type in equals mid, open brackets, and we'll do it on text. And then you can do the start number. So you can say 4 characters in to 7, for example, and it will give you the middle part. So it really does depend on what you want to pull out. So there's you've got the different ways of dealing with text: len, trim and clean, right, left, and mid. Okay, so if you deal with a lot of text, those are quite useful as well. Moving on to something called flash fill. Now I've decided to include this in replacement of the function or the formula concatenate, which you may be used to using. Now concatenate is a very popular formula in Excel for combining or merging cells together. So for example, if you had names, so everybody's first name in one column, everybody's second name in another column, and you wanted to merge them together, you could use the concatenate function to do that. However, Excel, when they released 2013, provided us with a feature called Flash Fill, which makes your life a whole lot easier when you want to do things like that. So I thought it would be nice to show you how Flash Fill works, because people always seem to really, really like this feature. And if you haven't sort of used it before or noticed it before, because it is fairly new, unless you have 2013 or 2016, it's not available to you. It's not available in 2010 or below. This is a really, really nice little feature. So again, we're going to do exactly as I explained just there. So we've got a list of employee names. So they're listed by their surname, comma, first name. And what I want to do is I want to list all the first names in this column and then all the last names in this column. So how am I going to do that? Well, I can use the Flash Fill tool to make this really simple. All I need to do is type in the first one. So the name Lisa, like so. I'm going to select the first name, and then I'm going to jump across to the data ribbon, where we now have on the data ribbon, in the data tools group, the Flash Fill button just here. And when you click it, like magic, it fills in all those first names for you. So it means you don't have to worry about formulas, you don't have to do anything. It just does it for you. Okay, lovely and quick. We can do it a slightly different way as well, which you might find even easier. And let's do it on the last name. So the last name, again, all you need to do is type in the last name, so Page. And if I didn't want to reach for my mouse, I could just go to the second last name and start to type in the second last name, which is Taylor. And can you see as I start to type it in, it ghosts down the rest of them, so it recognizes the pattern, and it basically goes it down. If I want to fill in all the names, just hit enter and it will fill them all in for you. So there's two different ways that you can use that. That Flash Fill can be used wherever there is a pattern, so it can be used on things like email addresses. And I know this is something which I've had to do in the past, where I've been organising training for global offices, and we're all part of the same organisation, so we all have the same format to our email address. So it might be first name dot last name at company.com, but I don't want to have to go through and type in everybody's email address. I can type in the first one, and then I can use Flash Fill to copy them all down. As long as the pattern is the same, it will copy them down correctly. Okay, so that's a really, really good little button to use. Just out of interest, I'm just going to ask you, who already uses that button at the moment? Does anybody use that and like that feature? Or if it's new to you, shout, it's new to me and I love it.
Yeah. That's exactly it. 3 people use it, but a lot of people
Okay, 3 people use it and a lot of people are loving that. So that's good. If you get one thing out of today, Flash Fill, my friends, that's what I'm saying. I was ecstatic when I saw that in 2013, because I thought that was going to make my life a lot easier. Yeah, people tend to really, really love that. All right, moving along. Let's move along to some of the more popular, but some of the more slightly complex formulas. And again, if you're very advanced in Excel, you're probably going to be fairly familiar with these. Remember, this webinar today is really going through the popular formulas, not necessarily the most complicated formulas that people use. So if statements is another popular formula, and I'm going to show you 3 different if statements today. We're going to do just a very basic if statement, and I'm going to kind of break it down for you slowly so you can understand how you construct them. And we're also just going to go through a little bit of something called count if and sum if as well. And these are all statistically very popular formulas that people use in Excel. So let's start out by just doing a very basic, what we call an if statement. Now, I'm the first to admit I am not the world's greatest person at numbers. I was terrible at maths at school, and I do still struggle sometimes with things in Excel just because I'm not a numbers person. So I have to kind of talk things through, and I find it does help with formulas sometimes. If you kind of say out loud what it is you're trying to do, can really help you, and I find that works with if statements quite well. Okay, so what we're trying to work out in this spreadsheet, and what we have here is just a product list. So we have all of our products, our customers, the date, the item cost, number of items, total cost. Our shipping column is blank. That's what we're going to be working out. And then our totals, which are going to adjust once we add in our shipping costs. Now, what are we trying to work out here? Now, let's look at the information that we have on the page. Just above our table of data, we have a little bit of information that says there's no shipping charge for orders over, and you can tell these are American spreadsheets, over $1,500. There's no shipping charge for orders over $1,500. Otherwise, there is a 2% of the cost for the shipping. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to say, or we want to type in a formula that says if this is equal to or over 1,500, then no charge. However, if it's under, we want it to apply 2% of this as the shipping. And that's what we use our if statement for. Okay, so let's break it down. I'll do it a couple of times because I know the first time I did this I was like, what? I was so confused. So let's just do it a little bit slowly. We're going to start with our equals sign. So the first thing we're saying is if the total cost is greater than or equal to 1,500. That's the first thing. That is our argument. Okay, so if we're going to do open bracket. So once we do our open bracket, Excel then tries to help us. So now it's telling us underneath, in bold, what's the logical test. So when it says logical test, it says, what am I testing against? And the test is this number greater than or equal to 1,500? So we want to say, if F7, and then we want to do the greater than sign, which in Excel is that. So if it's greater than, or if it's equal to, and that's that sign there, equals 1,500. That is our logical argument, okay? Is F7 greater than or equal to 1,500? So if you look down below, that's our logical test. We then need to put a comma in, and then you see the bold moves to what it says. Excel is saying, what do you want me to do if that is true? So if it is greater than or equal to 1,500, what do you want me to do? So I actually want you to do nothing, because if it is, there's no charge. Okay, let's put another comma in, and you'll see now in bold it says, okay, but what if that is false? So what if it is under 1,500? So we're going to then get it to apply 2% of the total cost. So we're going to say, if that's false, we want you to do the total cost times 2%. Okay, and then we're going to close the bracket. That is your if statement. Okay, so then I should be able to copy that down by double clicking, and we should be able to very quickly see if that's correct or not. So anything that's under 1,500 should have shipping applied. If it's over, like this one here, there should be nothing there. Okay, let's just double click on this one just here so you can just take another look at that formula as we've copied it down. So again, it's saying if F8 is greater than or equal to 1,500, if that's true, then do nothing. If it's false, which in this case it is false, do the total cost times 2%, which will give us the shipping value essentially. Okay, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. I know we don't have bundles of time to go into this, but hopefully that gives you more of an idea. And you know, if you're somebody who think, oh, that formula might be useful to me, you can do a little bit more research into that. But that's sort of the basics of how an if statement works. You can take ifs to the nth degree. There are nested ifs and ifs within ifs, and things can get really, really complicated. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go through all of that on the call today, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea. Wonderful. Now, before we move away from ifs, there's just a couple of others which are also very popular if statements that people tend to use, and that is count if and sum if. And again, these work on the basis, and again, I like to say these out loud before I do them just because it helps me. So I'm just going to type in equals and count if, and what we're basically doing with this formula when we open the brackets is saying count. So count this cell. So remember, count will count how many cells you've got. Count if, and then we're going to specify some criteria. So if the cell falls within that criteria, we're going to count it. If it doesn't, then we're not going to bother counting it. Okay, and you can see underneath we have our arguments, the count if, and then it says we want the range and then the criteria. So I'm going to do, and I'm just going to do it on a section of this data. So we're going to say count if, and then we're going to specify the range. So I'm just going to select F7 to F15. So I'm going to say count, when you look in this range of data, F7 to F15, only count the cells which are greater than 1500 again. Okay, so I just need to, now that I've got my range in there, I'm going to do comma, and it's saying what criteria. So I'm going to put in my criteria, and you have to put this in speech marks. So I'm going to do greater than 1500, like so. Okay, so now that's saying basically only count the cells which are in the range of F7 to F15 if they're greater than 1500. So that's telling me that there are 2. Okay, so F7 to F15, there should be 2, which there are. So there's that one there and there's that one there. Okay, you can do the same with sum. The sum if is also something which people find really useful, saying only add up or calculate the cells which meet this specialized criteria as well. So we're going to do it in the same kind of way. So equals sum if, open brackets. Again, it's asking us for our range. So to keep things consistent, let's just do F7 to F15 again. And I'm going to do comma. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. So I only want you to sum cells that are greater than 1500. And then I'm going to close that bracket. And there you go. Okay, so those are just 3 ways of using if statements which you might find particularly useful. Hopefully that's given you a little bit of a taster of if statements. And if you have been using them, hopefully that's kind of given you a little bit more knowledge with regards to if statements. The other formulas, or the last formula I should say, because I think we've done a few more than 10 actually in the session today. The last one, which is one of the most popular formulas that people tend to use, are Vlookups, and these are really, really useful. And there are 2 different ways of doing, well, there's actually a few different ways of doing Vlookups, because you can do something called an HLOOKUP as well, which is pretty much the same thing, except it's used when your data is running horizontally, hence the H, instead of vertically down the page. So that's the difference between a Vlookup and an HLOOKUP. It's just which way your data is running, horizontally or vertically down the page. So we're going to focus on Vlookups, and there is something called Vlookup Exact and Vlookup Approximate. And you pretty much construct the formula in exactly the same way. It's just the last argument on the end, which is a true or false argument, that makes it different, that makes it either exact or approximate. And we'll go through that so that you understand it in a little bit more detail. But let's do one example first. Now, what a Vlookup will basically do is it will allow you to take a piece of information. So for example, I've got 2 pieces of data here. I've got this first table here, which is listing all of these products, bamboo armchairs and such. And then I have another table over here, which is basically showing me those same products, but slightly different information to this table. So this first table doesn't tell me the department or the category, whereas this table does. Now, I have both of these tables on the same spreadsheet. It might be that you have these 2 on completely different spreadsheets, and that's fine. You might have them on different worksheets within the same workbook, or they might be in completely different documents. That's absolutely fine. I've just got them on the same page just for ease in training, but they can be in different workbooks. Now, what we want to do essentially is I want to be able to say, I want to find out the department and the category for these products listed here. And I want to find that information out from this other table over here. So I want Excel to look up the product bamboo armchair in this table and return to me the department first of all, and then when I do it in this column, the category. Okay, and that is what we call a Vlookup, because it's looking up the information from a different table. Now, in order for you to do a VLOOKUP, there has to be a piece of common information in both tables. So the common information here is the product. So I have a product listed here, and I have the products listed in this table as well. If you don't have the same product, it's not going to know what to look up. Okay? So product should have a common denominator. Something else I would also highly recommend you do is that you name your data. This is going, particularly if you're working with large amounts of data, because you'll see in a moment we have to kind of select the entire table, and nobody likes to be scrolling around and selecting tables. I find it a lot easier to name my tables first of all. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to click in this first table, and I'm going to press Control A to highlight the entire table. I do this just out of habit now for all of my tables in Excel. Whenever I create a table, I always give it a name because I find it so useful for navigating. I can jump back to that table. I use the table name in formulas, which is sometimes a lot easier than using the cell range. There's lots of really good reasons to name your table, so it's a good habit to get into. So I've highlighted my table, and in the name box just above, which is just here, I'm just going to call it product list. Now, when you're naming your tables, you can't have any spaces in the name. So it either has to be separated with an underscore, or there just has to be no space whatsoever. So you type in the name and then press enter, and that's named your table. And I'm going to name this one as well. So I'm going to click in the table, I'm going to press Control A, and I'm going to call this one, let's just call it department. Oops. And press enter. Okay, so I've named both my tables. It's going to make my life a lot easier. So now I can start to construct my VLOOKUP. So I wanted to pull from this table the department first of all. Now again, there's a couple of ways I can do this. Now when I was first learning how to do VLOOKUPs, I found it a lot easier to do this using the function helper dialog box thingy, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to use that first of all, and then I'll just show you how you type it. Once you get used to using it, then you'll be able to just type it in. But I'm going to click on formulas, and this time I'm going to use the function. Now I could go to insert function, or I could find it in lookup and reference, because I know there is a lookup, and there it is at the bottom just there. So there's various different ways that you can find the function. And this is the little box which I found quite useful when I was learning. Okay, so it's saying lookup value. So what do you want me to look up? Now what you want to put in the lookup value is that piece of information that is common between the two tables. So in this case it's the bamboo armchair, so it's this cell just here, A6. And you can see it's got in brackets bamboo armchair is what it's going to look up. It's then saying to me, okay, so you want me to look up bamboo armchair. What table do you want me to look it up in? So now I need to tell it the cell range. So as I said, I could go then and highlight the entire table, but I've named my table, which makes it a lot easier. Now again, you can just press F3 and that will bring up a list of all the table names that you've created. I can't press F3, as I told you before. My F keys don't work when I'm on a webinar, but you can just press the F3 key to get up the names of your tables that you've created. I'm just going to type mine in. I called it department, I believe. This is where I can't remember. There we go, department. So that's the table that I'm looking up my information in. It's then saying to me, okay, so I'm looking up bamboo armchair in the table department. What information are we looking for here? So I want it to pull back the department. So it's saying me what column number is that? So starting from the left is column 1. So 1, 2 and 3 we have here. So product department category is 1, 2 and 3. So the column index number for this, I wanted to pull back department, is 2. Range lookup. Now if you remember I said at the start there are 2 ways of doing a VLOOKUP, exact and approximate, and this is where you type in true or false, and that determines whether this is an exact match or an approximate match. Okay, now here we're doing an exact match because I want it to exactly match the words bamboo armchair. I don't want it to approximately match it. I want it to match that word, so it's going to be false if you want an exact match of the text. Okay, and I'm going to click OK. And there it gives me my department, furniture. Okay, if I double click that, you can see what that looks like if you just typed it in. So VLOOKUP A6, which is what we're looking up, bamboo armchair, in the table department, column 2 is what we're pulling back, and it's false because we looked for an exact match. Okay. VLOOKUPs are actually, they do take a little bit of practice, but once you kind of get your head around it, then they are quite easy to do. So you can see I've just double clicked to copy that down. I can do exactly the same for category. So this time I'm just going to type it in. So I'm going to do VLOOKUP, open brackets, and again we're going to do exactly the same thing. And you'll see underneath, lookup value. What is the common denominator? Again, bamboo armchair, comma, table array. I could press F3 and select my table. I'm going to type it in. You can see it's helpfully brought it up for me. Oops. Sorry, that was me. Oh my goodness. My crazy typing. You see, I just can't type today. There we go. And column index number. This time I'm looking for the category. So remember, from the left, 1, 2, 3. So this time we're pulling back the information in column 3 of the department table, and we're doing an exact match, so false. And there we go. All right. And you can then copy that down. So that's a VLOOKUP using the false argument, which is an exact match. I'm going to very quickly, just to finish up, because we have about 4 minutes left, show you VLOOKUPs as an approximate match. And so you can see the difference. Okay, so finally, we have our VLOOKUP table here, slightly different data. We've got some order numbers, item cost, subtotals. Now, there's no information in this reduction column. And then we have adjusted total just here, which hasn't been adjusted yet because the reduction hasn't been completed. We then have another little table here, which is showing us reduction rates. So basically it's saying whatever the total is here, wherever it falls in here, apply this reduction rate. So this is where we're using an approximate match, because if you can see, for example, the first one here, the subtotal 1,363.80, if I was to do an exact match and it looks in this table, it's not going to find that. There's no 1,363 listed. I just wanted to do an approximate. It's going to fall somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500, which is where we do the true argument on the end instead. So the VLOOKUP is performed in exactly the same way, except we use the true argument. Okay, so I'm going to do it again twice for you because I firmly believe that repetition is what makes it stick in your brain. And we're going to go back and we're going to use, oops, the little table first of all. Actually, no. What's the first thing we're going to do? I almost forgot. We're going to name our tables to make our lives easier. So again, Control A. This one I'm going to call Orders. And Enter. And I'm going to do the same for this. Control A to highlight the table. And I'm going to call it Reduction. And press Enter. As I said, it takes 2 seconds. It just makes your life a lot easier. So let's do our VLOOKUP again. Lookup value. So this time, what do I want it to do? I want it to look up the subtotal and see what kind of reduction rate we need to apply. So our lookup value is this, D3. Table array. So where do you want me to look up that subtotal? I could press F3, but that's what you're going to do. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to type in the name of my table, which is reduction. Column index number. So what do I want it to pull back? I want it to pull back the percentage. So again, working from the left, we've got column 1, column 2 is what I'm looking for. And this time the range lookup, we're doing an approximate match, true. Okay, and it's pulled back 3%, which if we look at the table is correct because 1,363, it's above 1,000, but it's not 1,500, so it's going to be a 3% reduction rate. Okay, we'll do it one more time just so you can see when you type it in. So VLOOKUP, lookup value is this, comma, table array is the name of the table, reduction, you can see it highlights, colon and then, sorry, comma, and then the column index number is 2 and true. Okay, and you can see that that's correct as well, and you can then just copy that down as you normally would. All right, so hopefully that kind of shows you the difference between VLOOKUPs using the false argument, VLOOKUPs using the true argument. As I said, there are HLOOKUPs as well, which are exactly the same. It's just if you have your data running, I've got my data running vertically down the page. If you have it going horizontally, you want it to look up horizontally as opposed to vertically, so you would use HLOOKUP instead. But the formula is pretty much exactly the same as what we've done. And that is 1 hour, my friends. It goes so quickly. As I said, hopefully some of you learned a few things out of there. If you even just went away with one new thing, then I'm happy. As I said, this is the 10 most popular, not necessarily the 10 most complicated formulas. So depending on your level of Excel knowledge, will really depend on how much you got out of that session. But hopefully, regardless, you enjoyed it and you did pick up a few little tips. And that is me finished for today. So I will say good afternoon. Thank you so much for logging on to the webinar today, and I will hand you back to James. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks so much for that, Deb, on behalf of myself and everyone listening. It was really insightful for me and will no doubt help a lot of us in our day-to-day work with Excel. For those of you who enjoyed the webinar as much as I did, you can send me an email at info@webinarsteam.com without any punctuation aside from the @ sign and the dot for .com. So that's info@webinarsteam for a recording of the live class. Once it's uploaded, I'll look to get it out as soon as possible for those who'd like to hear it again. So I guess that's time to wrap up. So once again, thanks, Deb, and thanks to everybody listening for spending an hour with us. Until next time, that will be that. So thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.